Hello, Mycroft friends. I'm Joshua Montgomery, the CEO here at what?
Well, it doesn't show that you're on.
I'm the CEO here at Mycroft AI, and I'm happy to be coming to you live from our lovely offices in Palo Alto, California, where we raise money and try to run the business operations here at Mycroft. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to come and speak. Today, I think the topic is the future of voice, which is a fun topic to talk about. So 3 years ago, when we started the project, it became clear to everybody involved on the team that there would be an opportunity in the near future to combine technologies that use machine learning to create an experience for users that is indistinguishable from a human. And a couple weeks ago, or maybe a couple months ago now, Google did a demo at Google I/O where they demoed their Google Duplex technology and proved the thesis. For those of you who haven't seen that demo, we'll put a link in the below. But the Google Duplex demo is a artificial intelligent voice assistant making outbound phone calls to restaurants to book a table and to a hair salon to book a hair appointment, and interacting with the person answering the phone so naturally that the representative of the restaurant or the hair salon wasn't aware that they were talking to an AI. Now, that demonstration was really narrow. And by narrow, I mean it didn't have a broad domain. They weren't going to discuss the application of Nietzschean philosophy to the Trump administration. The only thing they were talking about was setting a hair appointment or working with the restaurant and booking a table. And when you see that demo, you can very clearly see what the future looks like across the entire domain for voice. And I would argue that it's the same for video, that if I recently saw one where I think it's Peel or Key or Peel, whichever one it was, voiced over an avatar that was based on a video about President Obama, where when you looked at the video, it was mimicking his actions, and because the artist was able to mimic the voice, it sounded just like the prior president of the United States. And it was kind of a demonstration of what artificial intelligence is moving towards in terms of being able to mimic a human being. And that's really where we feel the voice assistant space is going, both in voice and then, of course, also with video rendering. The ability to combine those two things into an experience that when you get a video call, it might be me with my ukulele, or it might be a complete artificial intelligent assistant, and you won't be able to tell that the person on the other end of the computer isn't I'm not going to say not a real person, because if you can't tell it's a person, it actually is a person, but not a human person. And so we saw this about 3-4 years ago when we started looking at speech synthesis, when we started looking at voice recognition, speech recognition. We started looking at a variety of other different pieces of technology. And we set out to build an artificial intelligence that runs anywhere and interacts exactly like a person. The idea being that you could run a full artificial intelligence stack on anything that's powerful enough and not network connected, or that's low power and network connected with a lot of the intelligence operating in the cloud. Run it anywhere. Run it on your audio amplifier, right, for your guitar. Run it on your car. Run it on a laptop. Run it on a mobile device, and be able to have a conversation just like that. My assistant and I have a conversation. So, in my case, I pick up the phone and I say, "Hey, I want to meet with my good friends at Mozilla next week. Can you reach out and send them an email and schedule a meeting for me?" And that's all I really have to do. My assistant, Johnny, some of you may have interacted with him, has access to my schedule, has access to my email, has access to my contacts list. He reaches out. In some cases, it'll be directly to the person involved. If it's maybe a developer, in the case of maybe the CTO, Sean White, he would reach out to Anna, Sean's assistant, and offer up a couple of times. They would go back and forth and schedule a meeting. But the important thing there is that my interaction with Johnny is totally natural, and I don't have to tell him every step of the way exactly what to do. he has enough intelligence and he has enough access to my life to be able to schedule that meeting on my behalf. And that's really where this entire space is going. And it's going to dramatically impact business, certainly. And that's I think that the business is maybe the least creative application of this technology. I think that there's a ton of really cool things that are coming down the pipe. But let's start with the least creative, most obvious, right? So in Google's case, they built this duplex technology. And when they brought it to stage, the idea is that the Google duplex thing calls a real person at a restaurant and schedules a table, okay? That is not the long-term application for this technology. The obvious application is that the person answering the phone is an AI. And in some cases, it'll be an AI calling, but in many cases, it'll be a human calling. And that the person at the other end of the phone, the person who initiated the call, doesn't know that it's an AI on the other side. Certainly for inbound calls. Now, admittedly, I think telemarketers are going to make wide use of technologies like duplex to trick you on the phone. I'm sure that scammers will use similar technologies in the future. But the obvious business application is being able to accept thousands and thousands and thousands of inbound calls using an artificial intelligence without having to pay people to sit at a desk and answer the same questions over and over and over and over again all day long. Other business applications include building technologies like cars, building technologies like electronics that you can speak to naturally. In some cases, those electronics will have the personality of the brand that built them. One of the things we learned during our integration with Jaguar Land Rover was that our friends at Jaguar were really interested in having a voice assistant that represented their brand. So a voice assistant with a British accent. I think the exact quote that I got from Jaguar was, they wanted it to be sassy and sarcastic, right? So something that is truly British, like think John Cleese, right? And could represent their brand globally. And I think that Jaguar is one of thousands or tens of thousands of companies that really have an opportunity to build a voice assistant or build an AI that represents their brand and interacts directly with their customers, reduces their costs, their personnel costs associated with having a relationship with those customers. And then, of course, improves the customer's experience. That when a customer calls in and says, hey, I just bought a car and, I'm 3,000 miles into it and I need the oil changed. Can you schedule an appointment? That's all they have to do. That the voice assistant has access to their calendar, has access to Jaguar's calendar, schedules a time. Maybe a Jaguar rep comes out and picks up the car. But the user experience is, you say what you want and it just happens. Yes. And that's going to happen across a variety of different industries. Call centers, obviously, automotive's a big industry. Smart speakers are a big industry. I think that voice assistants integrated into individual apps are coming, certainly. My guess is that Brad and his team over at Google are working on how to pass voice queries into applications and how to query those applications in a way that Google's assistant can act as a front end to any application. Now, I would also suspicion a guess that they will design that system in a way that favors Google and not necessarily the person who wrote the app. But I think that type of integration is definitely coming in the business world. And that's going to cut costs. It's going to eliminate a lot of jobs that are low value. And let me be really careful how I say that, because I want to make sure that people understand all labor has value. If you go to work and you work hard, by definition, it has value because people pay you for it. But it's important. All work is important, whether it's work to create dignity for the worker, whether it's work that provides services for end users. When I say low value work, what I mean is work that doesn't fully engage human intelligence. The voice assistants that I see in the near term, so I define near term as between now and the time my daughter reaches 30, so my kid's 10. So the next 20 years or so will be very limited, I think, in terms of their ability to creatively solve problems. So, and there's some really good examples of this. So X.AI is a company that creates an assistant that provides support for email scheduling. So going back to that task that I talked about with Johnny, where I'm simply trying to schedule a meeting with Sean over at Mozilla. In that case, when people use X.AI for tasks like that, many become frustrated. So that's a very simple, narrow application that doesn't involve a lot of creative problem solving. I mean, you're effectively trying to match two schedules, something that you could do with a pair of arrays and maybe 3 lines of Python. But because of the complexities of human language, because of the complexities of availability, because of the complexities of geography, it's very difficult to solve that problem comprehensively in a way that provides an excellent user experience to every person who's engaged in the activity, right? So given that, the idea that a voice assistant is going to be able to solve a problem like Congress can't get anything done is ridiculous. And the idea that some of these technologies will be able to be creative, so create art, write music, and perform some of the other actions that humans are good at and engage in and are successful in, is also, I think, far too, right? They already have AI that can write music. They already have AI that can write poetry, but they don't have AI that can write music that can write music that's as creative and new and novel as the opening bars of Star Wars in 1977. Something where John Williams just blew the audience away with a melody that's familiar to everybody today because it is so unique and powerful. That type, yes, an AI could write something that sounds very similar to that, write 50 different versions that sound similar to that. But to create it in the first place is something that's uniquely human. And so I see the future of voice, at least in the next 20 years, as filling out this void in the current job market, in the current labor market, and certainly in the current, in services that are provided for just regular everyday folks, as reducing redundancy, reducing the amount of low value work, so non-creative work that needs to be done by people, and freeing those people to engage in work that is higher value, that is more creative, that allows them to spend their time doing what humans are best at, which is inventing and solving problems. And so, we're at the very, very beginning of this. I think that one of the things when I hear people who are critical of voice technologies today and say things, oh, that's not natural and whatever, look back 4 years and none of this stuff even existed at all. Like the voice assistant stuff was this simple voice command thing that misunderstood almost everything you said, right? In many cases, the voice companies were running these technologies on chip. And because they didn't have access to or weren't using the latest and greatest machine learning models, it was very difficult for them to create a user experience that was in any way realistic. And over the last 5 years, since I would argue Siri was the first widely adopted version of this, but of course it was followed very quickly by Google's Assistant and then by Amazon, who took the lead by embedding it into a very capable smart speaker. Over the last 4 or 5 years, it's really improved substantially to the point where individual users of the technology really can have a fairly natural experience for limited tasks. So the question becomes is where does it go from there? And the answer is it becomes more and more natural and more customized. And then finally, more and more capable of solving real problems, I think is the third stage. So and in terms of making it more and more natural, that's primarily a function of data. These technologies are based on huge data sets that are fed into machine learning systems that spit out models that are able to solve problems using this very modern approach to data processing. And the more data these systems acquire about end users, how they're using it, the types of questions that they're asking, the more capable they will become. And so, since these technologies are fairly new, I mean, Google, I think, just started shipping the Google Home less than 2 years ago. Today they don't have the huge volume of data that they eventually will have about how these customer interactions function. They're just now, for example, beginning to put in place the ability to call and response. So, hey, Mycroft, set a timer. Okay, how long would you like for that timer to be? That's a call and response with me asking a question, Mycroft asking for clarification, me providing clarification. That level of interaction is just beginning to exist now. And of course, there are much more complicated human interactions that may involve 3 or 4 people in a conversation. That type of interaction and that type of natural ability to carry on a conversation, I think, is where a lot of the initial work is gonna live. The next piece is making the technologies more useful. And I think that XAI is a really great example here of a company that's doing really great things in a very narrow space that will work extremely well with future voice assistants. So in XAI's case, their AI, one of them is named Amy, I don't remember what the other ones are called, that schedules meetings, would be able to plug into your calendar on one side and your voice assistant on the other and become the default destination for queries about your schedule. So you would say, hey, Mycroft, set me up a meeting with Sean White at Mozilla. That would trigger X.AI, right? Which would reach into your address book and say, oh, I have Sean White's information. Hey, it turns out Sean White has an assistant named Anna, and I'm going to contact Anna instead of Sean. And so there, the voice assistant has made, or the X.AI's technology has made a decision that the best way to contact this person is through their assistant and not through Sean, right? It reaches out and touches Anna's email and says, hey, Anna, you know, Joshua Montgomery wants a meeting. Can we set something up? There's a back and forth in terms of availability. And then the meeting gets scheduled on Sean's schedule, provided he approved it, without any interaction from me as the initiator, or in this case, Sean as the person I'd like to meet with. Now, admittedly, if it went straight to the person I was having the meeting with, they would have to have some interaction. But in this case, the voice assistant and X.AI system end up as a buffer between me as the user and Sean as the person I want to meet with. And from my perspective, that's a very, very natural interaction, right? I say, hey, you know, Mycroft, set me up a meeting with Sean White sometime next week. And then, you know, a couple hours later, a day later, on my calendar, boom, is a meeting with Sean. Another step for that interaction might be, and X.AI, importantly, there would be the intermediary. We at Mycroft don't have to develop all of the artificial intelligence surrounding interacting with the calendar systems, accessing contacts, like coming up with the logic surrounding when to connect to the person's assistant as opposed to when to connect to that person. We simply provide the voice front end, and X.AI is a plugin that adds intelligence to the voice assistant. And so I see the future of this as various different companies providing utility across all of the voice assistants. Not, you know, I would argue that Mycroft is probably not most people's first choice for, you know, the front end for their voice assistant today. Now, I think that might change over the course of the next 5 or 10 years if we're successful and continue to grow. But today, you know, most people probably start with Amazon Alexa or Google Home. You know, if they're in the Chinese market, they might start with Genie over at Alibaba, and so or Viv over at Samsung. If I don't know if Viv's customizable, I would hazard a guess that Viv 2, the one they're working on in San Jose, will be, but we'll just kind of set that aside. People will go and build a skill for one of these voice assistants, and then hopefully, you know, we can end the platform wars at some point and start making these things interoperable. So the idea would be that if you provide a scheduling skill, you know, it works with Alexa, it works with Assistant, it works with Mycroft, it works with Viv, it works with Genie, and you as basically an intelligence provider, as a service provider, are able to focus on just what you do. And in the case of this example, it's X.AI scheduling meetings, right? And the platforms become a way to distribute your product or distribute your intelligence to the end users. And you know, there's probably some way to get you paid to do that, whether it's you know, you charging the users directly or some kind of an app store sort of integration. But that's the whole idea. And so, you know, the first step becomes the naturalness of the integration. The second step becomes utility. So stuff like scheduling meetings, certainly tons of IoT stuff like lights and locks and heat and, you know, all of the things that people are beginning to build into their home and connect to voice. And then I think the final step is creativity, right? And I think that the first versions of the creativity for the voice assistant will be very similar to the type of creativity that our good friend Will Wheaton brought to the book Ready Player One, right? So for those of you who, I love the book personally, love the audio performance, Will Wheaton, went into a studio and read that book. And if you listen to it, you can hear that as an actor, right, he changes the tone of his voice. He changes the inflection of his voice. He changes the pitch. He does, kind of pseudo imitations of the characters that are speaking, so that when H is talking about, killing bad guys in a first person shooter, and Parsifal is talking about pursuing the egg, those two characters have different voices within the book, depending on whether they're quoted. And so, Will and a voice engineer probably spent significant amount of time in a studio somewhere, with Will developing voices and developing imitations for various different quotes, and the voice engineer processing the audio and putting together what's effectively a very creative performance of Ernest Cline's novel. And that's the type of creativity I think that will first come to voice. So the ability to drop a book into a voice assistant and spit out a audible quality performance of that book, I think is something that's coming in the future. Now, I don't think it'll be here next year. I don't know. Amazon spent $23 billion on research. Maybe it will be here next year. But I think it is coming in the next 5 or 10 years. I think that you will be able to drop text in, whether it's from a news article or whether it's from a complete novel. And these voice assistants or these voice rendering technologies will be able to render them in a very creative way. I also think that avatars are coming to this space. And I could be proven wrong. I mean, one of the things we always talk about here is don't be clippy, right? Like, don't be clippy. Like we actually are very much in danger of that, because we do have the cute little Mark I device that could be clippy if we do it wrong. And I thought that Microsoft's experiment with that avatar, I don't know. I think there are probably people who liked it, but if you listen to the Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me performance where Clippy suggests where to dig the grave, you can definitely understand what a lot of the public thought about Clippy on Windows XP, I think is when it was launched. But I think avatars are an important part of the future. And I think that Key and Peele demonstration where they showed, they tracked the facial motions of the actor. They voiced over, because voice technology isn't ready to do that type of thing yet. It's getting close. And we're able to make an avatar of President Obama say whatever he wanted to say, right? I think that is coming, with the entire interaction being synthetic. So the ability to create a photorealistic rendering of the user with a voice that sounds totally natural, with an interaction that's very, very natural, I think will have a lot of value for a lot of folks. And the original applications there might be sales videos. It might be like customized nightly news from your nightly news anchor. I think that there's certainly an aspect of assistance there. So being able to go to my computer and say, hey, Mycroft, and have a little British guy pop up on the screen and, what do you need me to do? And that type of thing. Don't be clippy, right? I think that is coming. And, I think that people like to see who they're talking to. And I think voice is just the first step towards these virtual people, right, that we will be interacting with all the time, some of whom will be experts for their brands, some of whom will be your representative on the internet, some of whom will be, generic brands that are generic assistants that encompass the entire internet. And I think that those interactions will begin to get fairly natural. And then I think that the final step of this is creativity. I think that soon, I think before I die, certainly, well, unless I'm destined to die tomorrow, I think that these voice assistants and the technologies that underpin them will start being able to create in truly creative endeavors, be able to make new music, right? Being able to improvise and work together with musicians to play music that is new and novel, and to create the types of experience that professional jazz musicians can create on stage. I think that it's relatively actually, you know what, Hollywood already has, I think it's called something about a squirrel. But Hollywood has a book on how to write screenplays that's formulaic. Like you're going to spend 1 minute here and 1 minute. I mean, that's why all the movies seem the same, right? Like act 1, act 2, act 3. We already have a formulaic method of creating scripts for movies. I think that the ability to add avatars that are photorealistic along with voice experiences that are very realistic along with creativity mean that 30 years from now, you may be able to render an entire movie just by building a bullet point script, right? Like here's 12 bullet points, render the movie for me and have a 2-hour movie drop out of the computer with all of the background scenes and everything all cut. I think that that's coming. Certainly it's coming. I don't know if it's coming in 20 years or 30 years or 100 years, but it's definitely coming, unless the world ends, which is a real possibility. I, for one, welcome our robot overlords if anybody's indexing this for the future. So that's really where I see things. I see a really bright future for the technology. I see a lot of jobs where people aren't able to engage in activity that takes advantage of their full human potential. I see a lot of those jobs changing substantially in the future so that when an actual human is on the telephone for a company, they're not running through the security verification. They're not doing some of these other low value activities. They're really helping you to solve problems or creating deeper relationships with their customers. I certainly see improvements in the overall stack getting to the point where people are having difficulty telling whether or not they're talking to a person. That's already happening. And it is, I think that trend is certainly going to accelerate. And then long term, I see these things being integrated into avatars. I see creativity. I see these things being hyper natural in how they interact with other people, to the point where we as a society or we as a species achieve our goal, which is at least our goal here at Mycroft, which is a voice assistant that interacts naturally and runs anywhere. That it's a voice assistant that's so natural, or it's an avatar, or it's an AI that's so natural that when you speak to it, you can't tell whether you're talking to a human or a machine. That's where we're headed with this. And unlike some of the other technologies out there, we're trying to do this in an open way. The idea is that anybody can pull down this stack, put it to use for business, put it to use personally, put it to use as in a classroom, put it to use in a movie studio, put it to use anywhere that they choose to use it in a rocket ship, right? And create a user experience that's hyper natural so that the people, the humans around them that are using the technology can focus on doing what they do best, being creative and problem solving, while the AI and the voice assistant deals with the mechanical every day of human life. So anyway, if that type of goal excites you, I encourage you to join our community. You can always find us on our website. We have very active forums where people are engaged. We have a very active Mattermost channel where folks are always online talking about Mycroft, talking about the voice space, talking about all of the things that are happening here. We currently are raising money on Start Engine, where you can become an investor in voice. We're one of the only, as far as I know, voice platforms that's created a mechanism for average everyday people, for people who are contributing to the stack, to become investors. And then, of course, you can buy a Mark I and join the Mycroft community as a developer or just as somebody who's donating data to the system so that we can improve it over time. We'd love to have you. We're always looking for more folks, and we really appreciate you engaging with us and engaging with Mycroft AI. So thank you so much for your time today, and I will I'm sure be online soon. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly through my Mattermost channel, or certainly post on the forums. I'm happy to engage in a conversation. Thank you so much.